Thank you, Gleaves, for that very kind introduction. When he mentioned that my elder son is decided to become a historian, I think it does make a statement about the business of doing history and what my son has learned from watching me do history. But it's not exactly the statement that Gleaves suggested. But my conclusion from this, and my son Hal is, what shall we say, candid enough to suggest it himself, and that is that after all these years of watching me do history, he figured that, well, it can't be that hard. After all, if his old man can do it, who can? But Gleaves and I were talking just a little bit before now about our approach to teaching and our approach to classes. And we were comparing notes about how we deal with large groups. We both teach large classes. I teach an introductory survey to American history at the University of Texas each year. And it's typically about 300 students. And so we try to figure out techniques, devices to bring students into what we're doing and to get them interested. And Gleaves was sharing with me how before each of his lectures, he lays out a series of questions about what he's going to cover in that lecture. And the questions are as kind of open-ended as, okay, so what's the big deal about Jamestown? What's the story on the secession crisis? And that strikes me as a very valuable way of approaching any topic, of introducing any topic. And I'm going to steal a page out of Gleaves's notebook by posing a question to you. And the question is, what's the big deal about democracy? And I'm going to share with you an experience that I had with one of my classes. But before I get to that, I'm going to share with you, I'm going to impose upon you, inflict upon you, this big theory that I have of American history. And some of you have been to an earlier lecture, and so this might repeat a little bit of what I've said, but my big theory of American history is that there are two characteristics. There are two institutions, there are two value systems that characterize American society in the United States. And these two value systems are, these two institutions are democracy and capitalism. And if you had to describe the United States in two words, you could call it a capitalist democracy or a democratic capitalist system. And so, when I'm describing American history, I often use these two themes as a way of explaining how American history develops. And look at the development of democracy. Democracy today is not what it was in 1900. It's not what it was in 1800. It evolves over time. America's capitalist economy, the free market, private enterprise system, is not today what it was in 1900. It's not what it was in 1800. So we can trace these two themes over the course of American history. Now, interestingly, to me anyway, democracy is a principle, is a word, is a set of values that every American elected official is quite happy to embrace. If you listen to speeches, if you listen to debates, public officials are quite happy to embrace democracy. That's what America stands for. It's very rare that you hear an American public official embrace, voluntarily, unprompted, in a speech, capitalism. They might use euphemisms, but the word capitalism will not cross their lips, despite the fact that nearly all accept the idea that capitalism is a good way to go. It's a great way to organize an economy. I did an experiment with a class in American history. This was a couple of years ago. No, it was in 2005. George W. Bush had just been reelected. And this was the spring semester, which began in January. So during the space of 10 days, George W. Bush was going to give two major speeches, both televised. One was his second inaugural address. The other was his State of the Union address. And so I told my students that I wanted them to watch the speeches. This was a course in American history. They should watch it. It was their civic duty, if not their assignment. I wasn't going to require it exactly, but I was, well, to be honest, I was going to bribe them. And I said that if you watch these speeches, actually I didn't even put it that way, I said, if you can, because we were talking about this question of capitalism and democracy and how one seems easier to cling to and openly own up to than the other. I said, okay, if any of you can hear President Bush utter the word capitalism, or, and maybe it's cognates, capitalist, capitalistic, in either of these two major speeches, then you all get the week off. You don't have to come to class, you don't have to read the assignments, you don't have to take the tests or quizzes. Okay, so they listened. And they didn't hear it. I knew they wouldn't. I can't remember the last time any president has uttered the words. Well, this is a really interesting puzzle to me. And I don't know exactly what the answer to this puzzle is. What's wrong with the word capitalism? Almost nobody in American society, certainly in American government, disputes the idea, but somehow this word has acquired a bad odor and nobody wants to go near it. Contrast this with democracy. Now, democracy, if you listen to those same speeches, democracy must have been uttered 25 or 30 times. I'll put the question to you this way. What is the objective of the Bush administration, the current Bush administration, in Iraq right now? We've got a small group here. I can throw out the question. Anybody want to give me an answer? What is the stated objective? Why are American troops there? To establish democracy, precisely. What do you think would happen if President Bush said, American troops are in Iraq to establish capitalism? Dead silence. That's probably, I think it'd probably be more than dead silence. A lot of people would say, we told you, it's all about oil. It's for the big oil companies, right? Okay. Now, I say this certainly by no means to criticize capitalism or by no means to criticize democracy, although it might sound like that in just a moment. Because my question is, what's the big deal about democracy? This preface is by way of noting that democracy in American society is considered sort of an unalloyed good thing. In fact, generally speaking, people are quite happy to accept the premise that if the United States does establish democracy in Iraq, then the mission was successful. It's almost as though democracy can do no wrong. Okay, now I'm going to challenge that view, not in the context of Iraq today, but in the context of American history. Because it seems to me that if it doesn't work in America, it probably doesn't work anywhere. I think the United States is the best example of a functioning democracy. Anyway, keep that in mind as I shift gears slightly and say that this evening I would like to speak in praise of James Buchanan. This is a lecture series on American presidents, and I've got to speak on behalf of James Buchanan because nobody else will. James Buchanan is widely considered by historians like me, not like, by other historians, not me, by other historians, by political scientists, as one of the 4 or 5 dismal failures in American history. Someone who had not simply no good impact on American history, but a seriously evil impact on the course of American history. And why? Because James Buchanan was the president who let the South secede and didn't do anything about it. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you why James Buchanan, in fact, was, should I call him a good president? No, I don't want to use the term good. I want to say that James Buchanan was an honest president. James Buchanan was a president who represented the spirit of American democracy, the whole idea of democracy, better than, let me just pick another president out of the blue, Abraham Lincoln, his successor. Now, I know Bill's going to chuckle, and he's waiting for me to make this case.